Do you want to make it big by selling your content online? I'll bet you do. And if that's so, let's start with another question. How do you become the world's largest publisher of online comics? What you've done has succeeded because you have a readership of at least 10 million every day and 35 million a month. Some of your individual comics get 5 million reads every day. You have at least 82 million worldwide users, you have 125 billion views every year, you get so many readers that you're willing to pay 6 or 7-figure salaries to your top creators. With numbers like that, your publication must be really good, right? No, it could be a lot better. Welcome back to the world of Webtoon. And first, a disclosure. Most of Webtoon's viewership leans younger and female, which is not me. So naturally, a lot of the stories that get promoted on Webtoon will be designed to appeal to that demo and not to me. But, here's the key point. That shouldn't be an excuse for bad storytelling, and a lot of Webtoon's promoted stories range from poor to intelligence insulting. And as you'll see before the end of the video, this might have created a house of cards that Webtoon can't hold up. Now maybe that's a good thing if you're looking to make a buck, and if you watch to the end of the video you're going to get some ideas about how you can do just that on Webtoon, but it's not that good if you want to write something that will last, that will give you glory, that people are going to talk fondly about for years to come, right? It's just not. So the question is, do you want to be mediocre with your work? No, you shouldn't want to do that. You poured your heart and soul and energy into this. You should want to create something that will be beautiful, beautiful enough for people to talk about for a long time to come, right? So let's take a look at the most annoying or maybe the most profitable Webtoon tropes out there and see if we can use them to our advantage while also doing better than them. And fortunately, that shouldn't be too hard to do because as you're going to see, a little effort goes a long way. And we're going to do this video in a different kind of a format than you might be used to. We're going to be reading along with these Webtoons as it goes on, so come with me. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to help this channel grow. Let's begin. Trope number 1. The love triangle. Love triangle stories are usually bad, but Webtoon makes the worst of them almost every single time. In fact, I don't think I've found a love triangle story on Webtoon that I actually wound up liking. Love triangles there often share the same elements also. First, the average-looking but super nice female lead. Second, 2 handsome male characters who fall for the average-looking but super nice female lead. 3, one of them has dark hair, the other has lighter hair. 4, the lighter-haired guy is usually clingy as hell and lives for the female lead, but this is not always the case. Sometimes it's the dark-haired guy. 5, unsurprisingly, the dark-haired guy, whoever the first male lead is anyway, usually wins. 6, the second lead is the loser with leftover feelings who won't move on. And the primary source of tension in this type of love triangle story is the question of who's gonna get the girl, and there's nothing inherently wrong with this story question, but the problem is in the presentation. The male characters, especially the second lead, usually don't have a purpose other than being wish fulfillment characters for the female audience who live vicariously through the female lead. And I'll give a good example of how this sort of plot can ruin a good story. So earlier this year I came across a webtoon called My Little Bookstore, and this was the description. Quote, "Do you have a dream you've given up on? Was it because you hit a wall? Was it because you've come to terms with reality? Or have you never given up? Fresh out of university, Jua starts freelancing for a TV show as a newbie writer. After her first TV show gets canned, she finds a strange bookstore and is reminded of her dream as a writer. Will she resume pursuing her dream, or is her dream too far-fetched? Now, given what this channel is about, you might have guessed that I was intrigued with this description. I thought this was going to be about Jua trying to create a good story that gets published, even though it's a tough business. But instead it fell into something resembling the love triangle blueprint. In this particular case, the second male lead, Seojun, who has lighter hair, as you might have guessed, never had a remote chance, but who cares really? This story was so much less than what its description sold it as. There was very little of Jua pursuing her writing dream, and it was mostly about her navigating the environment these two guys dragged her into, which involved awful people in South Korea's notoriously intrusive entertainment industry. So that part was okay, but the story could have been so much more. Alas, it wasn't, because it was following elements from this love triangle blueprint. I'm not saying it was a bad story, but it left so much on the table because it fell back into that trope. So this is often a problem, and I'm not even going to get started on how badly this love triangle blueprint destroyed Odd Girl Out, because I have an entire video about that right here. So if you're going to do a love triangle story, try to make it unique. And one way you could do this is by having your character's love triangle get caught up in a bigger world, a bigger picture where their romance is kind of just wanders into a no-fly zone. And this works for romance in general too, but I think it could especially help with love triangles. And as an example, there's this story I've been outlining. I'm almost done with the outline. It's part of my sci-fi universe, and I think this concept could do well on Webtoon, so releasing it there is an idea that I've been toying with as a goal for the midterm future. And my story, it has a love triangle in it, but it doesn't follow the Webtoon blueprint, to say the least. Let's just say that it's part of a bigger picture involving space colonization and a Red Scare style mass hysteria that the main characters get caught up in. So that's the idea. If you want to find out more about this story, subscribe to the channel and consider becoming a channel member or joining my Patreon page, because at least some of my stories, the ones that I'm able to release there, will be there eventually. And right now, you'll also get these videos early and your name featured in them, like these good people here. So the bottom line is, when it comes to love triangles and romance in general, be creative, don't go to the well. Trope number 2. Wish fulfillment male characters. Now, I have to go into wish fulfillment characters in more detail. It's the natural follow-up to trope number 1. And one of the major problems with a lot of stories on Webtoon is that the male characters lack depth. They're there solely for the target audience's wish fulfillment, which is why a lot of these love triangle stories are such a bore. Chanyang in Odd Girl Out is the worst example of a wish fulfillment character I've come across, but there's a lot more of these characters on Webtoon. Now, The Fox Club is an excellent Webtoon. Just looking at the cover and reading the blurb might not make you think that way, but trust me, it is, and it's only gotten better as it's gone on. It's my bronze medalist on the platform right now. I love it. It's one of the best examples of a character-driven story you can find over there, and you'll learn a lot about character-driven fiction by reading it. I love its exploration of court behavior and power dynamics. I love the friendship between Onyu and Sherry, because it's not just about the good times. You can see the tense times too, like in any relationship. I love the hard choices the characters are forced to make, like Sora with her blackmail situation. Yeonju is a believable and deceptive villain. Ilmi is one of the best written characters on the Webtoon platform, period. She sometimes acts like a mafia boss, but you can see why she thinks she has to do this. But there is one character that's majorly out of place. Minu Guan. Minu is the perfect guy. Tall, handsome, cool, smart, athletic, emotionally mature and aware, popular, all the girls want him, yada yada, you know how it is. He has no problems and he's always a source of relief. So he's obviously there only to be a wish fulfillment character that acts as the main character Anyu's love interest, and we're clearly told from the very start that Onyu is average looking, unlike the rest of the girls in the Fox Club. So Minu is there for fan service only, and that's fine because I like him, but it's out of place in a story like this. With how serious things have gotten now, I almost roll my eyes when I see him getting any focus because it's so obviously fluff, it's so obviously a waste of my time as a reader. Now, this is a good way to change the pace, because things can't be serious all the time, but you could do it in a more interesting way by focusing on the daily activities of Onyu and Sherry. Minu just isn't necessary. So this is only a minor quibble. I like Minu in isolation, and the author H.J. Wong, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, has done a good job of keeping him contained in a cordon sanitaire. But if he escapes from this containment, he will ruin this webtoon. I'm not kidding, so I hope that doesn't happen. But if you want your story to trend on Webtoon, adding a male character like Minu could be a good idea. Just make sure that you keep him contained and make him fit in with the rest of the story. And it's funny because I have a character that kind of looks like this in that sci-fi story of mine that I mentioned a few minutes ago, but he also subverts the wish fulfillment trope. So again, if you're interested to see what I might have cooking up in the future, make sure to subscribe because I wouldn't even dream of making an attempt at releasing a webtoon until I get at least 50,000 subscribers. That's the only way it could possibly make any sense. So hopefully you'll help me, and let's move on to the third annoying trope. Trope number 3, the misunderstanding. It's no secret that lack of clear communication can kill a relationship, but Webtoon relies on this trope a lot, often to the point where it feels shoehorned because the author or editors were too lazy to think of a more creative way to generate conflict. A good one occurred recently in chapter 14 of a new webtoon called The Students of Illip Arts High, and I like this one so far. It has the potential to fill the void that Odd Girl Out left. So in essence, we have Seojun, the human copy machine who comes from a farm family that lives in the boonies, and this country girl then meets a city-dwelling art genius called Soai. I have no idea how that's pronounced. You know my Korean is bad. Anyway, these two meet in a game, and Soai has social anxiety, so she suffers from bullying despite her being a genius, and she was really looking forward to meeting Sol in person, as you might expect, because Sol is kind of the only person that's ever really been a friend to her. And the webtoon delays their reunion for a comically long time. I was getting a kick out of this. So this was a good way to start the story because it kept readers around, kept them interested. They wanted to see what would happen when these two met in person. But then in chapter 14, after the reunion finally happens, we see Soai coming across Sol sitting with the girls who bullied her. And this was a good characterization for both of them because we saw Soai's anxiety and Sol being a naive country girl. But this was another thing that almost made me roll my eyes too, because knowing Webtoon, this could have easily gone into several weeks of a contrived conflict just after they had their reunion that was delayed for so long. At that point, this story needed to deepen their friendship and not tear them apart from the beginning. Fortunately, another lead character named Jugyeong, I hope I'm pronouncing that right too, came in to save the day, and she was perceptive enough to spot what was going on. So that was a good piece of development for her. And so now we see these three girls shopping around in Seoul, which is giving rise to a much bigger and more interesting plot point, which is a frame job involving one of Jugyeong's friends. So try to be more creative with how you create conflict between characters in your story, because a lot of the time a simple misunderstanding that becomes a drawn out period of angst isn't necessary and winds up dragging your story out and making your readers bored. But if you want to cash in on Webtoon, you can use something like the Seoul and Soe example, place it in relation to an average looking female lead and a wish fulfillment male character, maybe with a love triangle, and you could probably make it trend. The rare cases of a misunderstanding that have actually been done well come in Odd Girl Out's first season, when Nari and Yuna's friendship degenerated over the misunderstanding involving a letter that Yuna thought Nari crumpled up, and in chapter 96 of the Fox Club, when Sora gave in to blackmail and gave a secret about Ilmi which came from a misunderstanding. Both of these things, though, were building up for a long time, so these misunderstandings didn't come out of the blue and cause a whole problem on their own. The misunderstandings were inevitable. So if you want to do a misunderstanding right, follow those examples. Trope number 4. The possessive male lead. Since a lot of male characters on Webtoon don't live for anything other than desiring the female lead, don't be surprised that a lot of them get possessive, though the trait varies in how bad it is. One recent example I can give is I Give You My All. Now, if you remember my video from a few months ago, I recommended this webtoon as a comfortable departure from a lot of the platform's romance cliches, but unfortunately in the last few chapters before I made this video, it became more cliche. In episode 38, Sehyui keeps telling Taeyong, I hope I'm pronouncing those names right, that she needs to talk to him about something, but he won't listen because he can only think with his little head. There were hints of this, so maybe I shouldn't be surprised, and now Sehyui thinks that he can't help her with her abusive adoptive parents, even though he knows what they're up to, and even though he feels more than physical attraction for her. So this is a misunderstanding of Sehyui's that comes based on rumors, but at least it didn't come out of nowhere, given Sehyui's already low self-esteem. Taeyong didn't even allow her to talk because he thought being possessive was being romantic. I think this story could have been written better without those tropes, but at least Taeyong is paying for being possessive and self-absorbed. Unfortunately, that's not the case in a lot of other webtoons. There's Chanyang and Odd Girl Out, of course, but unfortunately there are much worse examples. Perhaps the worst of all comes in a webtoon called Cry, or better yet, Beg. It's a Wattpad adaptation, no surprise there. If there's one saving grace of this webtoon, it's that the art is gorgeous, which is the thing that caused me to look at it in the first place, but I quickly discovered what this was going to be about and dropped it in 4 chapters. I do know the gist of it though. The relationship between the female lead, Layla, and the male lead, Matthias, is abusive to say the least, and that's fine if Matthias pays for this, or at the very least if it leads to a tragic ending that reveals a moral truth, but apparently that's not what happens in this story. Reportedly, there's a happily ever after where the abuser doesn't pay for his actions and his abused victim still loves him. And if you're wondering, yeah, there's a light-haired second male lead that apparently treats Layla right, but becomes the loser who never had a chance and still has leftover feelings because, of course. The series has been on hiatus since March though, maybe for good reason. Look, I get it. I understand why this sort of genre has its appeal, just like I got why Twilight and 50 Shades got so popular. But is that really the kind of story you want to write? For Webtoon, it's a rational decision, But unfortunately, these kinds of stories bury the good ones. Hey guys, brief intermission before we get to the fifth trope. If you like my content and want to support the channel, and if you're watching this far, I assume you do, super chats are now enabled, so if you want to support me with a super chat, I would greatly appreciate it, and I will respond to each super chat with an in-depth comment. Now, trope number 5. Immersion-killing male bodies. Like Mother Like Daughter is my second favorite story on the platform, but even as something as good as this can still fall victim to Webtoon's tendencies. This example came in chapter 48. There's a 16-year-old kid in high school. He's good looking, has a bad reputation, and there's rumors around him already being a gigolo. No problem with that, could be interesting. But then it's revealed he has a body like this. Now, I'm not going to complain too much about this. I think this recent drive to make characters unattractive, which is a trend particularly prevalent in the video game industry right now, is odd, because stories are supposed to appeal to fantasy. At least Webtoon tries to do that. We want our heroes and heroines to be beautiful because we seek beauty inside and outside of ourselves. It's fundamental to who we are as human beings. As storytellers, we should embrace this. Our stories themselves are supposed to be objects of beauty. But there is a time where you shouldn't do this, and that time is when it would make your story violate the Zelda rule and remind your viewers that what they're seeing isn't real. It's a hard rule to observe with 100% faithfulness like Ocarina of Time does, and even great stories sometimes don't. Case in point, Like Mother Like Daughter broke it badly in episode 48. This kid, well, again, look at his body. Do high school kids have lean, muscular bodies with 8-pack abs, which means they're under 10% body fat? No. Even a lot of professional athletes don't have bodies that look like this, because most of the time when you do, you're on steroids. For example, here's Alex Pereira and Sean Strickland, who are 2 UFC fighters. Here's that kid. Yeah, so even the toughest and most elite athletes on the planet often don't look like that. But a 16-year-old kid does? That's not believable. That takes you out of the story. Speaking from experience, you're usually not going to get a body that starts to sort of resemble that until you're in your 20s, maybe in your late teens when you stop growing and if you train really hard. So again, it's understandable why Webtoon does this, especially given its demos, but if you're going to focus on that, at least make it believable beforehand. Some random 16-year-old isn't going to have a body like that. Which brings me to my next point, because that body could have worked in a different setting, but it took place in high school. So, trope number 6, the generic high school setting. I don't know why Webtoon promotes so many high school stories. High school is usually not going to be the most interesting setting out there, and a lot of these plots could have been much more believable if they took place in another environment. For example, there's a new Webtoon I've started called Stealing Her Place. This one features Yesel, the daughter of a convicted murderer transferring to a new school. She lives with her aunt, who doesn't seem to want her there but feels an obligation, so all that's good. It sets up a major conflict for the main character right away. And I like the villain in this story too. Sohyui is genuinely the worst person you could possibly imagine. One look at her made me want to see the crap get beaten out of her. She's a heat magnet, as they would say in professional wrestling, but I'm not sure how much longer I'll continue this story. One of the reasons why I'm wavering is that the setting doesn't match the plot. Sohyui is a massive bully to the point that she gets physically violent enough to send Yesel to the hospital, but all the students and all the teachers see this and no one cares. There's no explanation for this. Maybe one is coming, but by now, 11, 12 chapters in, We needed to see some kind of hint as to why. So at this point, I'm wondering why Yesel doesn't just fight her, because even if she loses, a bloody nose would be a good lesson that Sohyui obviously needs to learn, and it might deter her from future bad behavior. If Yesel gets expelled, is that really such a bad thing with that school? Maybe it's bad given her family situation, but that plot point hasn't developed as much as it needs to be. And so this plot could have worked so much better in a different context. All Webtoon needed to do was make the characters 10 years older and have this take place in a corporate setting. For example, what if Sohyui was the young virtuoso president of the fastest rising fashion and beauty brand in the country since she loves makeup so much? If you work with Sohyui, you get a lot of money and a ticket to the top, but the dark side of the workplace is her bullying. What about that? If you do that, now suddenly it's a lot more believable why people overlook Sohyui's behavior, isn't it? See, these are the things that annoy me about Webtoon. They have decent concepts and then leave better plots on the table because they feel the need to return to the well. Stealing Her Place could have been a really good story about workplace bullying, but Webtoon chose to give it a generic high school setting. King of the Arena is another example. So since I train in boxing and MMA, this Webtoon's premise appealed to me and still does. The basic idea is that you have a school where anarchy reigned supreme and bullies were everywhere, so the student president, who's the best fighter in the school, instituted the arena with rules. It's not the worst idea in the world because when you take two guys, put them in a ring where they have to stand against each other as men, train for it, prepare for it, fight a fair fight, when you do that, you're going to create a certain level of respect. You're going to create discipline. You're going to create people who realize that bullying and street brawling and all that stuff is just dumb. But at the same time, the setting doesn't make sense because why weren't the school administrators doing anything about this? Why was it on the students to do it? And why does Gilsoo, who is the main character, improve so much after such basic training? That's a lazy shonen kind of shortcut. And the central conflict in the series, which seems to be about a gang of delinquents trying to overthrow the arena so anarchy can reign again, really isn't that compelling, and the characters are one-dimensional too. So maybe I'm nitpicking here. I'm not saying the series is bad, it's just not special, which is something that Webtoon chooses to do with a lot of its stories. I like King of the Arena because I train, but not for any other reason. A different setting and more attention to the characters would have helped this, but it's now 18, 19 episodes in, and we still haven't seen anything beyond Gilsoo being a bullied kid that becomes stronger through the shonen style training. It's not Hajime no Ippo, to say the least. Webtoon gets lazy with its storytelling a lot, which is good for you maybe, because if you create a high school bullying story, maybe with some action, you might have a decent chance of getting it to trend there. And since we're speaking of lazy storytelling, we'll get to our last trope in a moment, but before we do, I just want to let you know that the script for this video and all of my other videos is available on my Ko-fi page, so the link is in the description. You can go check it out. Trope number 7. Things that appear from nowhere. A lot of elements in webtoons happen with no explanation, or at least not a fast enough explanation, and this winds up ruining the setting, even when it's properly placed. One example I can give is a story called Powerless. Now I saw this one on the homepage a couple of months ago, and since it was MMA centered, I gave it a try. The premise of this one is that people suddenly got powers, started their own MMA league, and the purely human MMA league has almost been put out of business because of this. So the owner of the human MMA league needs to resort to promotional tricks involving the most notorious non-powered MMA fighter who basically plays the role of Brian Hawk in Hajime no Ippo. He's a jerk and you want to see him get beat, and that's what sells tickets. Now, there's nothing wrong with this premise, but as I was reading it, I couldn't help but wonder where these powers were coming from, and I just couldn't commit to it as a result. With a little explanation, this story could have been a lot better. For example, maybe genetic engineering experiments or cybernetic implants could have created these powered fighters. Maybe they're the product of an experiment gone wrong, or a corporation trying to increase its power, so it has now created a two-tiered society of powered versus non-powered people. Anything like that would have been much more substantial, and the main character's dislikable traits would have been more understandable too, but none of this happened, or at least not early enough. The powers were just there, melding something like superhero fiction into the real world with no explanation, and so it becomes hard to like the main character. Despite my interest in MMA, I dropped it after a few chapters, and maybe it's changed since then, but I haven't picked it up again. So you need to give a reason for the stuff happening in your story. If powers just appear, if superpowers just appear, you better explain why that happened. And this story didn't do that. So before we reach the conclusion, there is an addendum that's very interesting. As I was making this video, I learned that investors were initiating a class action lawsuit against Webtoon Entertainment Inc. Webtoon had its IPO on June 27th of this year, selling 16,371,549 shares priced at $21 each. Unfortunately for the company, its second quarter results, which were published just days after the IPO, weren't encouraging. Revenue was $321 million, but there was only 0.1% growth there. Ad revenue declined by 3.6% and IP adaptation revenue fell by 3.7%. Webtoon also revealed that any revenue growth that it had seen had been, quote, offset by the company's significant exposure to weaker foreign currencies, which means it suffered a net loss of $76.6 million. Naturally, Webtoon's stock price fell badly and is trading at $12.16 as of September 13th, 2024, Friday the 13th. Not so good for Webtoon. So Webtoon's investors are pissed, as you might expect, and so now the company is facing a class action lawsuit on the grounds that it materially misled them about their business. As far as I'm aware, Webtoon has also yet to turn a profit since it opened its doors about 10 years ago. Correct me if I'm wrong on that point. So is all this trouble the choice of content? I don't think so by itself, but if your main target audience is teenage girls who don't have a lot of money to spend in the first place, and you're selling non-material digital content, don't be surprised if you see this sort of result. Conclusion: try to make good content and sell it to the right people. Next week, we're going to go back into the wild and crazy world of professional wrestling that so many of us on this channel love so much. And we're going to look at the greatest story ever told in professional wrestling, the NWO angle. It's going to be a careful study of what went right and what went disastrously wrong. And at the end of it, we're going to be able to answer a bold question. Could WCW have been saved in 1998? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. We're going to find the answer to that question next time. Until then, keep writing and keep fighting.